Let me tell you of a scandal born not from a crime of passion, but from a quiet moment of truth in a moonlit garden. In a world built on appearances, a shared glance can be more dangerous than a dagger, and a single overheard whisper can unravel a lifetime of careful construction. This is the story of a man bound by his name, a woman who refused to lose hers, and the ruinous choice they made together. Julian Croft's life was a masterpiece of restraint, a carefully composed portrait of a man destined for greatness. As a junior minister in Her Majesty's government, every gesture was measured, every word weighed for its political gravity. Tonight, at the home of Lord Ashworth, he was the image of respectable ambition. His fiancée, Lady Amelia Sterling, a woman as impeccably bred and emotionally placid as a prize-winning porcelain doll, was a perfect match for the portrait. She was the final, crucial brushstroke. He moved through the crowded drawing room, the air thick with the scent of beeswax and ambition, his mind a careful ledger of names, alliances, and obligations. He smiled, he inclined his head, he discussed the tariff bill with a feigned passion that was beginning to feel like a second skin. But beneath the starched collar and the cool composure, a quiet desperation was taking root. He felt the crushing weight of his own name, the suffocating pressure of a future that had been chosen for him before he'd drawn his first breath. He felt like a ghost haunting his own life. Across the room, he saw her. She was not part of their world. She was a vibrant, startling splash of color in a monochromatic landscape. She was arguing with a pompous academic about Italian art, her hands gesturing with a passionate, un-English energy. Her laughter, when it came, was not a polite titter, but a rich, genuine sound that cut through the drone of the room. He knew who she was. Isabella Rossi, the daughter of a celebrated but impoverished painter Lord Ashworth, was currently patronizing. She was a curiosity, a piece of art her host was displaying just as he would a new sculpture. Julian found his gaze drawn to her again and again. It was a dangerous indulgence, a moment of truancy from the rigid discipline of his life. He saw the fire in her, the unapologetic vitality, and felt a pang of something he could only describe as envy. The room began to feel smaller, the air thinner. Excusing himself from a tedious conversation about grouse hunting, he slipped through the French doors and out into the cool sanctuary of the garden. The manicured hedges and precise gravel paths were a reflection of his own life, orderly, predictable, and utterly devoid of wildness. He sought the solitude of a stone bench hidden within a small rose arbor, hoping to reclaim some semblance of himself. But the arbor was not empty. Isabella Rossi was there, her back to him, her head tilted up toward the moon. He should have turned, retreated to the safety of the party. But he was tired of retreating. Isabella felt him before she saw him, a sudden shift in the quiet atmosphere of the garden. She turned, not with a start, but with a slow, deliberate grace, her eyes finding his in the shadows. He was the minister, the man with the perfect fiancée and the perfectly empty eyes. She had been watching him all evening, fascinated by the tension she could see coiled beneath his calm exterior. He looked like a man, slowly suffocating in a suit of armor. "Forgive me," he said, his voice a low, formal rumble that seemed at odds with the wildness of the night. "I did not mean to intrude. It is hardly an intrusion to seek air, Minister," she replied, her voice holding a faint musical trace of her father's Italy. "This house has a remarkable talent for consuming it." He allowed himself a small, genuine smile, a startling crack in his polished facade. "Aptly put, Miss Rossi." He took a step closer, drawn by an impulse he didn't bother to analyze. "You seem to be holding your own with Professor Albright. He is not known for conceding a point. He believes the soul of the Renaissance can be catalogued and filed away," she said, a spark of indignation in her eyes. "He speaks of art as if it were an equation. It is not. It is a fever, a prayer." Julian found himself mesmerized. No one in his world spoke of fevers or prayers. They spoke of dowries and districts. Her passion was a foreign language he suddenly desperately wanted to understand. He forgot for a moment that he was Julian Croft, the rising star of the Conservative Party. He forgot the tariff bill and Lady Amelia. He was just a man standing in a moonlit garden, listening to a woman describe art as if it were a living, breathing thing. The silence that fell between them was not awkward. It was charged, filled with the things they could not say. The scent of roses, the distant strains of a waltz from the ballroom, the cool night air on their skin, it all conspired to create a moment of dangerous, intoxicating intimacy. A twig snapped behind them. They both turned. Standing in the shadows at the edge of the arbor, his face a mask of smug discovery, was Mr. Finchley, a notorious gossip columnist whose pen had ruined more than one reputation. His eyes, small and bright like a weasel's, darted between them, taking in their solitude, their proximity, the charged silence. He gave a small, knowing smirk, lifted a finger to his hat in a gesture of mocking respect, and melted back into the shadows. The spell was shattered. The reality of their situation crashed down on Julian with the force of a physical blow. He was a minister, engaged to another woman, found in a secluded corner of a garden with a beautiful, unsuitable girl. The implications were catastrophic. Isabella understood it instantly. She saw the blood drain from his face, the mask of cool control snapping back into place. She saw the fear in his eyes, not for himself, she realized with a sinking heart, but for his precious, unblemished name. The next day, the whispers began. A small, carefully worded item in Finchley's column, mentioning no names, but describing a prominent young politician and a fiery Italian beauty enjoying a very private conversation among the roses. It was a warning shot, a promise of more to come. That afternoon, Isabella presented herself at Julian's formidable London office. She was not shown in. She waited for 3 hours until he finally emerged, ready to depart for the day. She stood before him on the stone steps, her face pale, but her eyes burning with a desperate resolve. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice low and trembling. "They saw us together. That man, his horrid little column. It is enough. My father's patron will cast us out. I will be ruined." He stared at her, the cold, hard reality of the scandal taking shape. "Miss Rossi, I assure you, I will make a statement. I will deny any impropriety. And who will they believe?" She countered, a note of hysteria creeping into her voice. "A denial is an admission in their world. I am a foreign girl with no name, no protection. I will be branded a fortune hunter, a seductress. I will be less than nothing." She took a ragged breath, the sheer terror of her situation propelling her forward. "You must help me. You are a man of honor. They saw us together. Now you must take me as your wife, or I will have no name left to lose." Julian stared at her, the desperate, impossible words hanging in the air between them on the cold London street. "You must take me as your wife." It was madness, a demand born of panic and social terror. His entire life, his career, his engagement to Amelia, it was all built on a foundation of careful, strategic choices. Marrying Isabella Rossi would not be a choice. It would be an act of self-immolation. "That is out of the question," he said, his voice harsher than he intended, a reflex against the sheer insanity of her proposal. He saw her flinch, the last of her desperate hope dying in her eyes. The fight seemed to go out of her, replaced by a terrifying, hollow resignation. "Then I am lost," she whispered, more to herself than to him. She turned to walk away, a solitary figure ready to be consumed by the scandal. And in that moment, Julian was struck by a profound and unwelcome realization. He was responsible. His momentary escape, his indulgence in a few minutes of genuine conversation, had led her to this precipice. His honor, the very bedrock of his public persona, demanded that he act, but marriage was a price he could not pay. His mind, trained in the art of political compromise, began to work, searching for a third way, a path between her ruin and his own. "Wait," he called out. She stopped, her back still to him. He walked to her side, his voice dropping low, conspiratorial. "A marriage is impossible, but the appearance of one, that might be our solution." She turned to face him, confusion warring with a sliver of renewed hope in her expression. "I don't understand. We will not marry," he said, the plan taking shape as he spoke, a desperate, intricate lie. "We will, however, become engaged." He saw her shock and held up a hand to forestall her questions. "It will be a performance, a temporary arrangement. We will announce our engagement, citing a whirlwind romance. It will supplant the current gossip with a new, more powerful narrative. We will be seen together. We will play the part of a devoted couple. We will allow the whispers of scandal to die down, smothered by the news of an official union. Then, after a suitable time has passed, we will stage a quiet, amicable parting. No blame, no shame. You will emerge with your reputation intact, perhaps even burnished by your association with a minister. And I—" He trailed off, the consequences for himself still a chaotic, unknown variable. "But it would be better than the alternative. And you will be free to marry your porcelain doll," she finished for him, a bitter edge to her voice. "A performance," she repeated, testing the word. "And what are the rules of this? Stage play, Mr. Croft?" "In public, we are in love," he stated, the words feeling absurd on his tongue. "We will be convincing. In private, we are business partners. This is a transaction, Miss Rossi, designed to save your name and protect mine. Nothing more. We will maintain a strict distance. Is that clear?" She looked at him for a long, searching moment, her dark eyes seeming to see right through his carefully constructed defenses. He felt a strange, unnerving sense of being truly seen for the first time in his life. "Perfectly clear, Minister," she said, her voice cool and steady. She had reassembled her armor. "It seems you have bought yourself a fiancée." He winced at the cold, transactional term, but he could not deny its truth. This was a bargain, a devil's pact made on the steps of his office. It was a desperate, reckless gamble, a lie they would have to sell to the most cynical, watchful audience in the world. And as he looked at Isabella Rossi's defiant, beautiful, terrified face, he had the sinking feeling that this was a performance that could very easily consume them both. The announcement of their engagement was a political and social earthquake. Julian summoned his fiancée, Lady Amelia, to her father's house to deliver the news in person. It was the most difficult conversation of his life. Amelia, who had viewed their impending marriage as a settled, logical conclusion, reacted not with hysterics, but with a quiet, wounded confusion that was far worse. "But I don't understand, Julian," she said, her placid blue eyes filled with a genuine hurt. "The arrangements were made, the invitations—" "I am aware, Amelia," he said, the lie feeling like a physical weight in his chest. "My feelings have changed. It is a situation for which I am deeply, profoundly sorry. The breaking of such a prominent engagement, and his immediate re-engagement to a woman of no standing, was a scandal of the first order." His political mentor, Lord Ashworth, summoned him for a dressing-down that was both furious and paternal. "Have you lost your senses, boy?" Ashworth demanded, his face florid with anger. "You have made an enemy of the Sterling family, one of the most powerful connections you had. For what? A pretty face with a painter's smock? You have jeopardized your entire career." Julian weathered the storm with a stoic, unreadable expression, offering no explanation beyond the carefully rehearsed lie of a sudden, overwhelming love. He and Isabella began their public performance immediately, starting with a carefully orchestrated appearance at the Royal Academy of Arts summer exhibition. The irony was not lost on either of them. They moved through the grand, crowded rooms, 100 pairs of eyes following their every move, every whisper a dissecting blade. He offered her his arm, and she took it, her touch light but electric against his sleeve. Their conversation was a masterpiece of misdirection, a public script for their private play. He would ask her opinion on a landscape, and her answer, a critique of the artist's use of light, would also be a commentary on the suffocating atmosphere of the room. "The artist seems afraid of the shadows," she murmured, her voice just for him. "He paints only what is safe, what is easily seen." Julian understood her meaning perfectly. They too were living in the light, terrified of the shadows where the truth of their arrangement lurked. But in the small, unguarded moments, the performance began to feel dangerously real. When an admirer of her father's work approached them, gushing with praise, Julian felt a surge of genuine pride. When he saw a rival politician, Mr. Abernathy, watching them with a suspicious, predatory gaze, he felt a fierce, instinctual need to protect her. He moved closer, his hand resting for a moment on the small of her back, a gesture that was both a public claim and a private reassurance. The touch was a spark in the dark, a brief, shocking moment of connection that was entirely off script. The lie they were living was a constant, nerve-wracking strain. They had to coordinate their stories, to memorize the fabricated details of their whirlwind courtship. They met for clandestine rehearsals in a quiet tea room, their heads bent close together over a table, their whispered conversations about their fictional history feeling more intimate than any real courtship Julian had ever known. He learned that her favorite color was the deep blue of twilight, that she hummed off-key when she was nervous, that she had a fierce, unwavering loyalty to the people she cared about. These were small, irrelevant details, but they began to piece together a portrait of the real woman behind the role she was playing. One evening, after a stilted, formal dinner with his unpardonably rude aunt, they sat in his carriage, the silence thick with the unspoken stresses of the night. "Your aunt seems to believe I am a disease that can be cured with a strong dose of disdain," Isabella said, her attempt at humor not quite masking the hurt. "My aunt is a relic," Julian replied, his voice tight with an anger that surprised him. "Pay her no mind. It's difficult not to," she sighed, turning to look out the window at the rain-slicked streets. "Sometimes I feel as though this lie is a dress I am wearing, and the seams are about to split." Without thinking, he reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on the seat. It was a simple, impulsive gesture of comfort. But the moment his skin touched hers, the air in the carriage changed. It became thick, heavy, charged with a sudden, undeniable current of attraction. They both froze, their eyes meeting in the dim, flickering light of the passing gas lamps. The world outside, the rain, the city, it all fell away. There was only the warmth of his hand on hers, a silent, forbidden confession that threatened to unravel their entire, carefully constructed deception. The touch in the carriage became a new, unspoken secret between them, a line they had accidentally crossed and now had to pretend did not exist. The performance continued, but it was charged with a new, dangerous electricity. Every public gesture, every polite touch required by their script, now carried a double meaning, a hidden weight of memory and desire. Their greatest test came in the form of an invitation to a weekend house party at the country estate of a prominent duke. It was an unavoidable command performance, a 3-day ordeal of scrutiny in close quarters. The countryside, which should have offered a respite from the city's claustrophobia, became a more intimate, more dangerous stage for their charade. They arrived on a Friday afternoon, the sprawling manor house abuzz with the elite of their world. Julian's former rival, Abernathy, was there, his eyes missing nothing, his presence a constant, low-level threat. Lady Amelia was also in attendance, a picture of cool, tragic grace, her presence a painful reminder of the life Julian had discarded. The weekend was a minefield of social traps. During a game of croquet on the lawn, Julian found himself partnered with Amelia. Their conversation was stilted, polite, and agonizing. "I hope you are happy, Julian," she said, her gaze fixed on a distant point, her voice devoid of emotion. "I am," he replied, the lie catching in his throat as he glanced across the lawn to where Isabella was laughing at some joke, the sunlight catching in her dark hair. He was struck by the sudden, shocking realization that the lie might not be a lie at all. That night, after a formal dinner that had been a masterclass in veiled insults and probing questions, a late-night storm rolled in, trapping the guests indoors. Someone suggested a game of hide-and-seek in the cavernous, darkened manor, a childish proposal fueled by brandy and boredom. It was absurd, but to refuse would be to draw attention. Julian found himself hiding in the vast, dusty library, the air thick with the scent of old paper and beeswax. He pressed himself into the shadows behind a towering shelf of books, his heart pounding with a ridiculous, childish excitement. A moment later, a figure slipped into the room, her silhouette framed by the faint light from the hallway. It was Isabella. She moved to the far end of the room, concealing herself behind a heavy velvet curtain near the window. From his hiding place, Julian could see her profile, illuminated by a sudden flash of lightning. In that instant, the game, the house, the other guests, they all ceased to exist. He was overwhelmed by a sudden, reckless impulse. He crossed the room in silent, predatory strides, the rumble of thunder covering his footsteps. He reached the curtain and, without a word, pulled it aside. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide in the semi-darkness. He didn't speak. He simply looked at her, and in his gaze, she saw the end of the performance. The carefully constructed walls of their arrangement crumbled into dust. He placed a hand on the wall beside her head, trapping her in the small space between his body and the window. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, a different kind of storm was breaking. This was the midpoint, the irrevocable choice. All the stolen glances, the accidental touches, the whispered secrets had led them to this moment. To risk everything not for a lie, but for a truth that had become too powerful to deny. "Julian," she whispered, his name a plea and a surrender. He leaned in, his other hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. "This was always a terrible idea," he murmured, his lips just inches from hers. "The worst," she agreed, her voice breathless. Then he kissed her. It was not the chaste, public peck of a fiancé. It was a kiss of raw, desperate honesty. It was the confession of every forbidden thought, every secret yearning that had simmered beneath the surface of their sham engagement. She responded with an equal, startling passion, her arms circling his neck, pulling him closer, deepening the kiss. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated truth in a world of lies. The sound of footsteps and laughter in the hallway outside the library broke them apart. They sprang back, their chests heaving, their faces flushed. The game was over. They had not been found, but they were, in a far more profound way, discovered. The lie was dead, and in its place was a dangerous, thrilling, and utterly catastrophic love. The kiss in the library was a point of no return. Their carefully negotiated business arrangement dissolved in the heat of that stolen moment, replaced by a secret, passionate affair conducted under the very cover of their public engagement. The risk was no longer about protecting their reputations from a fabricated scandal, but about hiding a real one. The world saw Lord Croft and Miss Rossi, the soon-to-be-wed couple. But in the shadows, they were Julian and Isabella, lovers stealing moments of breathtaking intimacy from a world that would condemn them. Their clandestine meetings became more frequent, more reckless. A locked room in a supposedly closed wing of a museum, their hushed whispers echoing amongst the silent, shrouded statues. A hired boat on the Serpentine at dawn, the morning mist providing a veil of secrecy as his hand found hers under the warmth of a shared blanket. In these stolen hours, they discovered each other without artifice. He learned that her bold, defiant exterior was a shield for a deep and tender vulnerability. She saw that his cold, restrained composure was a cage he had been trapped in his entire life, and that with her, he was finally learning how to be free. Their passion was a fire that threatened to consume them, but it was also a source of incredible strength. For the first time, Julian felt alive, his senses sharpened, the world rendered in vivid color. For the first time, Isabella felt truly seen, loved not as a curiosity or a project, but for the fierce, intelligent, passionate woman she was. But the brighter their secret burned, the darker the shadows grew around them. Mr. Abernathy, Julian's political rival, and a self-appointed guardian of public morality, had not been fooled by the engagement. He saw the genuine passion that now radiated from them, and it only deepened his suspicion that the entire affair was rotten at its core. He saw it as a weakness, a flaw in Julian's character that could be exploited. Abernathy began a quiet, methodical investigation. He spoke to servants at the houses where they had been guests, bribing them for information about late-night whispers and doors that were locked when they shouldn't have been. He hired a man to watch Isabella's small apartment, a man who dutifully logged Julian's frequent unchaperoned visits. The pressure began to mount. Julian's political career, which had once seemed so assured, began to stall. Whispers about his unconventional fiancée and his reckless behavior reached the ears of the party leadership. He was subtly passed over for a position on a key committee, a clear signal that he was no longer considered a safe bet. The lies they had to tell became more complex, more draining. They were no longer just pretending to be in love. They were actively hiding the truth of it. At a dinner party, a prying countess asked Isabella about their wedding plans. "We are in no rush," Isabella replied, her hand finding Julian's under the table, her fingers sending a secret coded message of reassurance. "We want to enjoy this time." Julian squeezed her hand in return, a silent echo of their shared deception. "Indeed," he added, smiling at the countess. "Some things are too precious to be hurried." The double meaning, the secret intimacy of the exchange, was a thrill, but it was also a constant, nerve-wracking performance on a high wire, with the chasm of discovery yawning below. One afternoon, Julian arrived at Isabella's apartment to find her pale and shaken. She held out a small, exquisite, and utterly anonymous bouquet of white roses. Tucked inside was a simple card, the handwriting unfamiliar. It read, "A word of advice. True love, like a hothouse flower, wilts under public scrutiny. Be careful your prize does not wither on the vine." "Who sent it?" Julian asked, his voice a low growl. "I don't know," she whispered. "There was no messenger I saw. It was just here." It was a threat, elegant and chilling. It was not from Abernathy. It was not his style. This was the work of someone else, another player in the game they did not know. The walls were closing in. Their secret world, once a sanctuary, was beginning to feel like a cage. Their love, once a source of freedom, was now the very thing that could lead to their destruction. The anonymous warning was a stone thrown into the placid surface of their secret world, its ripples spreading in ever-widening circles of fear. The joy of their stolen moments was now tainted with a new, sharper paranoia. Every lingering glance from a stranger, every unexpected knock at the door, felt like a potential threat. The author of the note remained a mystery, adding to their sense of being watched by unseen eyes. Was it a political enemy? A jealous rival? Or perhaps, most chillingly, someone from Julian's own family, making a final, desperate attempt to pull him back from the brink? The pressure from Abernathy became more direct. He no longer dealt in whispers and innuendo. At his club, he confronted Julian directly, his voice a low, condescending drawl. "You look tired, Croft," he said, swirling the brandy in his glass. Keeping up appearances must be an exhausting business, particularly when the appearance is so unconvincing. "My life is my own, Abernathy," Julian retorted, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'd advise you to focus on yours." "Oh, but I am," Abernathy said with a thin, predatory smile. "I am a student of character, and I find yours to be a fascinating and deeply flawed study. A man who abandons his duty for a flight of fancy, he cannot be trusted. In politics, or in anything else, the confrontation was a declaration of war." Abernathy was no longer content to simply watch. He was actively working to undermine Julian, using the scandal of his engagement as a weapon to destroy his career. The most painful front in this escalating war was the one waged by Julian's own family. His father had ceased all communication, a wall of silent, unforgiving disapproval that was more punishing than any tirade. His mother, however, took a different approach. She began a campaign of passive-aggressive warfare, inviting Julian to family dinners and seating him next to Lady Amelia, who was always coincidentally also in attendance. These evenings were exquisitely torturous, a public performance of what his life should have been. Amelia herself was never unkind. She was polite, distant, and heartbreakingly graceful, her quiet dignity a constant, silent rebuke. She was the ghost at their feast, a reminder of the respectable, passionless future Julian had thrown away. One evening, after one such excruciating dinner, Julian and Isabella sat in his study, the silence heavy with the ghosts of the night. "She is a good woman," Isabella said quietly, staring into the fire. "She does not deserve to be a pawn in this." "None of us deserve this," Julian replied, his voice weary. He was being stretched to his breaking point, torn between his love for Isabella and the crumbling ruins of his old life. He felt the weight of every lie, every deception, every person he had hurt along the way. "Perhaps we were wrong," he said, the words tasting like poison. "Perhaps this defiance is just a form of selfish pride. Perhaps the most honorable thing to do is to end it. For everyone's sake." Isabella turned to him, her eyes flashing with a sudden, fierce anger. "Do not say that," she commanded, her voice trembling. "Do not let them win. Do not let them turn our love into a mistake. What we have is real. It is the only real thing in this entire city of lies. I will not be ashamed of it, and I will not let you be." Her passionate defense was a clarion call, cutting through his despair. She was right. To surrender now would be to validate every lie their enemies had told about them. It would be to admit that their love was nothing more than a sordid, shameful secret. He stood and pulled her to her feet, his hands gripping her arms. "You are right," he said, his voice filled with a renewed, desperate resolve. "To hell with them all. To hell with their whispers and their threats." It was a declaration of defiance, a choice to stand and fight rather than retreat. But as he held her, he saw a flicker of movement in the reflection of the glass-fronted bookcase behind her. A shadow in the hallway, there and gone in an instant. A servant? Or someone else? The feeling of being watched was no longer a paranoia. It was a certainty. Their enemies were not just outside the gates. They were inside the house, listening, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The moment came, as it so often does, at a place designed for public spectacle and private judgment. The annual charity gala at the Royal Opera House. It was the glittering heart of the London season, an event where fortunes were displayed, alliances were forged, and reputations were made or broken in the space between arias. Julian and Isabella arrived together, presenting a united front of calm defiance. But beneath the surface, their nerves were stretched taut. The anonymous notes had continued, each one more specific, more menacing. The last one, delivered that morning, had contained only 3 words. "Tonight, the curtain falls." They knew they were walking into an ambush. Abernathy was there, holding court near the grand staircase, his eyes lighting up with a malevolent glee when he saw them. Julian's father, the Earl, stood like a stone sentinel in his box, his gaze fixed on the stage, pointedly ignoring his son's existence. The air was thick with a palpable, expectant tension, as if the entire audience was waiting for a drama that was not listed on the program. The trap was sprung during the first intermission. As the crowd spilled out into the Crush Bar for champagne, Abernathy moved to the center of the room, his voice raised just enough to command attention. "My dear friends," he began, a showman playing to his audience, "we are here tonight to support the arts, a noble cause. But we must also, I believe, support the cause of truth and public morality." A murmur went through the crowd. All eyes turned to him. "There is a sickness in our society," he continued, his voice resonating with a self-righteous fervor, "a sickness of deception. We have among us tonight a man who would be a leader, a man who presents himself as a paragon of honor. But I have in my possession proof that his entire public life, his very engagement, is a fraud." He held up a small packet of letters. Julian's blood ran cold. He recognized the stationery. They were letters he had written to Isabella, passionate, secret letters never intended for any eyes but hers. "These letters," Abernathy declared, his voice triumphant, "written to his supposed fiancée, speak not of wedding plans and a shared future, but of a clandestine arrangement, a shameful bargain made to cover up a sordid assignation in a garden. He had found their original sin. He knew the truth of their lie. And what is more," Abernathy bellowed, turning his attack directly on Isabella, who stood frozen at Julian's side, "I have a sworn affidavit from a servant in her building, detailing the minister's frequent, late-night, unchaperoned visits. This is not a courtship. It is a disgrace. A lie perpetrated upon us all." The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that was part shock, part salacious delight. They were exposed. Every secret, every lie, laid bare under the glittering chandeliers. All eyes were on Julian, waiting for his response. He could see the ruin of his career, the end of his life as he knew it, reflected in their judgmental faces. He had two choices. He could deny it all, brand the letters as forgeries, discredit the servant, and sacrifice Isabella to save himself. Or he could tell the truth. He looked at Isabella. Her face was ashen, but her gaze was fixed on him, her eyes not pleading, but trusting. In that moment, he knew what he had to do. He felt a strange, liberating calm settle over him. He stepped forward, taking Isabella's hand in his, a simple, powerful gesture of solidarity. He did not look at Abernathy. He looked at the crowd, at the faces of his peers, his rivals, his father. "Mr. Abernathy," Julian said, his voice ringing with a clear, unwavering authority that cut through the murmurs of the crowd, "is a man who deals in half-truths. He is correct that my engagement to Miss Rossi began as an arrangement I insisted upon to protect her from the ruinous gossip of men like him." He paused, letting the words sink in. "He is also correct that I have visited her, that I have written to her, and that I have fallen hopelessly, irrevocably in love with her. The only lie here tonight is the one Abernathy tells himself, that a man's honor is found in his title or his political position. He is wrong. It is found in who he chooses to stand by when the world turns against him." He raised Isabella's hand to his lips. "I choose her. Now and always." It was a forced declaration, a truth torn from them by their enemy's attack. It was not a flight. It was a fight. He had not saved his reputation, but in that single, defiant act, he had saved his soul. The scandal was absolute. The morning papers were a feast of salacious headlines, painting Julian as a disgraced libertine and Isabella as a foreign adventuress. Abernathy's calculated attack had been a resounding success. Julian's political career was not just over. It was annihilated. He was formally censured by his party and forced to resign his seat in Parliament. His name, once a symbol of integrity and ambition, was now a byword for scandal and poor judgment. The doors of society, which had once opened for him with effortless ease, were now slammed shut in his face. Invitations ceased. Friends averted their gaze, when they passed him on the street. He was a pariah, an outcast from the world that had raised him. The final break with his family was swift and brutal. The Earl summoned him one last time, not to his study, but to the cold, impersonal entrance hall of the family home. He did not offer his son a seat. "You have made your choice," the Earl said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "You have disgraced our name for the last time. You are no longer welcome in this house or in this family. A solicitor will be in contact regarding the formal severance of your inheritance." And that was it. A lifetime of duty and obedience, erased in a single, cold pronouncement. For Isabella, the consequences were just as severe. She was evicted from her small apartment, her landlord suddenly unwilling to associate with such a notorious woman. Her father's patron, Lord Ashworth, publicly withdrew his support, leaving her and her father destitute. They were utterly alone, stripped of their status, their security, and their futures. The only thing they had left was each other. They met that evening in a small, anonymous public house, a place so far removed from their former lives that they were in no danger of being recognized. The air smelled of stale beer and sawdust, a world away from the perfume and champagne of the opera house. They sat in a dark corner booth, the sounds of raucous laughter and shouted conversations a strange backdrop to the quiet ruin of their lives. "I am so sorry, Julian," Isabella whispered, her eyes filled with a profound, aching guilt. "This is all my fault. I forced you into this." Julian reached across the rough wooden table and took her hand. His own future was a terrifying, empty void, but in that moment all he could feel was a fierce, overwhelming love for the woman sitting opposite him. "No," he said, his voice firm. "You did not force me. You freed me. For my entire life I have been playing a part. The dutiful son, the ambitious politician. Last night, for the first time, I was myself." He looked around the noisy, common pub. "This is not the life I expected, but it is a life I have chosen. And I choose it with you." The reckoning was upon them. They had lost everything the world valued: money, status, reputation. But in the quiet aftermath of this scandal, in this humble, noisy room, they began to realize what they had gained. They had shed the heavy armor of their public lives. They were no longer defined by their names or their duties. They were simply two people, bound together not by a lie or a performance, but by a love that had proven strong enough to withstand the very worst the world could throw at it. It was a terrifying, uncertain redemption, but it was theirs. Their exile from London was not a grand departure, but a quiet, anonymous flight. With the last of his personal funds, Julian purchased 2 third-class tickets on a train heading north, to the Lake District, a place he knew only from the romantic poems he had read at Oxford. They left the city under the cover of a gray, drizzling dawn, leaving behind the whispers, the judgmental stares, and the ruins of their former lives. They found a small, neglected cottage for rent on the outskirts of a quiet village, a world away from the political and artistic heart of the nation. The cottage was damp, the roof leaked, and the wind howled off the fells with a mournful, lonely sound. It was the antithesis of everything they had ever known, and yet it became their sanctuary. The first few months were a harsh education in a life of genuine hardship. Julian, a man whose hands had been softened by a lifetime of paperwork and privilege, learned the blister-inducing work of chopping wood and mending fences. Isabella, who had lived a bohemian but sheltered life under her father's care, he had found a modest position teaching art in a nearby town, learned the practical magic of making a meager budget stretch, of turning a small garden plot into a source of food. The grand, dramatic passion of their forbiddens affair slowly transformed into something quieter, more profound. Love, they discovered, was not just in the stolen glances and secret kisses. It was in the shared labor of their new life. It was in the way he would bring her a hot cup of tea without being asked when she was sketching by the cold window. It was in the way she would mend a tear in his coat, her stitches small and neat. It was a love built not on drama and defiance, but on a foundation of mutual reliance and a deep, abiding tenderness. Stripped of their public personas, they were free to discover the true landscape of each other's souls. He was no longer the conflicted minister, and she was no longer the tempting outsider. He was Julian, a man with a quiet, thoughtful strength and a wry sense of humor she had never seen in London. She was Isabella, a woman of fierce loyalty, boundless creativity, and a resilience that humbled him. Their future remained a fragile, uncertain thing. They had no fortune, no connections, and a scandal that would likely follow them for the rest of their days. But they had a chosen life, one they were building together, piece by painful, beautiful piece. One evening, as they sat by the fire, reading aloud to each other from a book of poetry, a letter arrived. It was the first they had received in months. The postmark was from London. Julian's hand trembled slightly as he broke the seal. It was not from his father, but from a former political colleague, a man who had secretly admired his stand. The letter spoke of a new political movement, a radical party forming to challenge the old guard, a party that valued conviction over connections. They were looking for men of principle, men who were not afraid to stand for what they believed in, regardless of the personal cost. The letter ended with a simple question. Would you be interested in joining us? It was not a return to his old life. It was an offer of a new one, a chance to re-enter the world, not as the heir to a great name, but as himself, a man defined by his choices. He looked across the small room at Isabella, her face illuminated by the firelight. She was his partner, his confidant, his entire world. The scandal had been their end, but it had also been their beginning. He had lost his name, but he had found his voice. And whatever the future held, he would face it with her, their fragile, chosen life, a testament to a love that had been forged in the heart of a scandal.